belief that drives imposter syndrome is one of those. It's an identity level belief. It's the belief that your worth and your actions are tied together, that your worth depends on what you do. That's the whole expression of conditional worth right there. Done something good, I am good. I've done something bad, I am bad.
Hello and welcome to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I'm Will Polston. This is episode number 152, and in this episode I'm joined by Tara Halliday. Tara is a specialist imposter syndrome coach. She guides high-achieving leaders to eliminate imposter syndrome and develop energy, focus, calm resilience and effortless confidence. Tara has a PhD in engineering and over 20 years experience as a qualified holistic therapist and certified coach. Tara brings a practical and scientific approach to helping high performers reach their highest potential. Tara is the author of Amazon #1 bestseller, Unmasking the Coach's Guide to Imposter Syndrome and Outsmart Imposter Syndrome. Tara's mission and passion are to free high achievers and leaders from unnecessary internal suffering so they can live happy, meaningful, successful lives. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about eliminating imposter syndrome to develop energy, focus, calm, resilience, and effortless confidence. Tara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. Pleasure to be here.
So we have got a very interesting topic that we're going to be discussing today. As we've just heard, it's something that you're extremely well versed in. Imposter syndrome. For people that have heard about it, think they might have it, definitely think they've got it. In your definition, what is it?
It's very simple, Will. It's imposter syndrome is the secret feeling that you're a fraud when you're not. And with that comes the fear of being found out and an awful lot of self-doubt, stress, anxiety, coping behaviors, and yeah, it goes on.
Okay. So it's interesting because you say thinking you're a fraud, but you're not, which for me, just the thinking element that you've mentioned, obviously it links to mindset. It's just a topic that I absolutely love, which in terms kind of links with a belief is kind of my sort of understanding of it, and it's that thinking process, consciously or subconsciously, that's making people have that viewpoint of themselves. So you've gone deep into this. What's the reason why people aren't the fraud that they maybe think that they are?
Right. Well, they're actually competent, capable, successful people. All the evidence outside of them points to the fact that they know what they're doing, they're experienced, they're skilled, and they're talented. But at the same time, they have this self-doubt. So they logically, rationally, they know they're good enough, but internally, they're not feeling it. And it's that internal fight that's really the stress point of imposter syndrome.
Okay. So you mentioned self-doubt. I mean, I've even written it down. So self-doubt, for people to have self-doubt, there would have to be some form of reason as to why they're thinking that something may be the case. So I'm going to be really open and really vulnerable on this podcast episode today. At the time of recording this, 2 months ago, I released my book. For years, at this point, 8 years I've worked in the industry. I've done it for a long time. I've done over 6,000 hours of one-on-one coaching. I've worked with over 2,000 people. I've learned, literally hundreds and hundreds of books. And then the book came out, and there was this little bit of me, the little voice in my head that was just going, yeah, but Will, you're an imposter. You're not really an author. You're not really an authority on the subject. But the reason why I thought that was because what I've done, like, is I've learnt from lots of other people, right? So I've spent my life studying different people, getting an understanding of what they do. I've put my kind of spin on things, and maybe even in instances use elements of their work, and will obviously credit that or whatnot as opposed to what it is. So it's a case of, yeah, but you've not kind of really got that. So that was a feeling that I had. But what the logical part of my mind can also go, yeah, but Will, that's true. You have just learned from other people. But then my understanding of it was then me actually breaking down, well, what is the what is somebody that's truly learned something. And the rationalization that I had was I was thinking of all the other people that I respect, and it was just very evident that they've just done the same. You know, whether it's people like Tony Robbins had learned from Jim Rohn, whether it was Jim Rohn who learned from El Shoaff, whether it's Dr. John DeMartini who learned from Paul Bragg and a whole bunch of other people. Like there's all of these people that they've learned from. So it wasn't necessarily that in this very personal situation, it wasn't that it wasn't true, because it was true, but it was actually putting it in the context of everybody else, which was kind of what gave me that that peace of mind in that instance.
Mm. Yes, I mean, well, there is the phrase, there is nothing new under the sun. And you know, unless you're studying, I don't know, high energy physics, you're literally not discovering anything new. However, it doesn't mean, as you say, you don't put your own spin on it. So, you know, you're absolutely deserving of writing a book, having it be successful, being recognized and praised and applauded for it. A lot of people think imposter syndrome is being a beginner, like you're doing something new. So in your case, you're writing your first book. So you know, maybe that is what is causing imposter syndrome. But when we look at, you know, who suffered from imposter syndrome, Maya Angelou, who is one of the, you know, great literary greats who wrote loads of books, every single time she published a new book, she thought, now's the time they're going to find me out to be a fraud. You know, Meryl Streep, actress who's won more acting awards than anyone else on the planet, the start of every movie thinks, why will anyone come and watch me? That is what imposter syndrome is. So the thing is, you get to book number 10 and still feeling that self-doubt, that would be imposter syndrome. So that would be the feeling that, yes, I've got, you know, this is book number 10 internally. Yeah, but I still don't feel quite good enough. And so it's really important to see that imposter syndrome is not about being a beginner, because there's a lot of myths and misinformation out on the internet about what imposter syndrome is and what you can do about it. So Gary Vaynerchuk recently suggested it was a beginner's issue. So the solution, he said, just practice. Right? Now, if you're writing your 10th book, you've had enough practice. It doesn't solve it. And what it does instead is it makes people think, okay, if I just get this one next goal, if I hit this next goal, that will finally prove that I'm good enough. And it drives people into exhaustion and burnout, trying to use external success to fight an internal belief. And that's really the conundrum of imposter syndrome.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't ever heard of it be phrased as a beginner's issue, but yeah, I suppose in lots of instances it could be perceived as a beginner's issue, and that becomes that's why people think that that's the case. Oh, I'm an imposter because I haven't done it, and I've got my own theory on it, which we'll come to shortly. But bearing in mind, sort of we sort of go back the work that you do now in terms of helping people with imposter syndrome and helping high performers achieve their highest potential. I mean, you've had 20 years of experience working as a qualified holistic therapist, but you didn't start out like that. You know, you did a PhD in engineering. You know, it's quite the difference. So I'd love to know, how did you get to be doing this work?
Well, you have to rewind a little bit further, or a lot further, really. So when I was 13, right, in careers class, you know, decide what do I want to be, what do I want to do with my life? I wanted to be a psychologist. That was what was most interesting. What makes people tick? How do people get happier? My family disapproved. So they said, no, pick something else. So I picked, you know, I was good at science, so I picked engineering. It seemed interesting at the time. I got 10 years into a career as a director, as a, you know, engineering consultant after my PhD. And finally, it was enough is enough. You know, I came across the holistic therapy training. It was a 4-year program. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And it was the best decision of my life, because then I got back to, I guess, my true values of what I wanted to do, what gives me meaning in my life. And that is to help people who are suffering, particularly unnecessary suffering. And that's really how I came to be working eventually in imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is one of the most unnecessary sufferings there is, because it's a belief that's not true.
Do you think that that suffering was sort of born from your own suffering of working in a career that deep down wasn't the thing you really wanted to do?
The suffering related to imposter syndrome, so it wasn't necessarily my suffering. It was helping other people when I could see that they were in pain. That's the suffering I wanted to address. The engineering career was, it's like I could do it. It was all right. It wasn't exciting. It was just a job to pay the bills. But the work that I do helping people get rid of their suffering, that makes me think I'm never going to retire. Why would I? I'm already doing the best thing I possibly could.
Yeah, no, I can definitely empathize with that. I think that there's just socially, culturally, a shift of going from, all right, I'm going to learn, earn, and yearn, to just, I'm going to do something for the rest of my life, because every single day it fills me with energy, it fills me with enthusiasm, I'm making a difference, I'm earning money whilst I'm doing it, I'm good at it. All of those reasons, I just think that there's a shift. I can't get my head around the idea of doing something that you don't enjoy for 4 decades to then do the thing that you really want to do. But that's a conversation for another day. So let's break down into the type of work that you're doing. So people, there was a key word that you mentioned, which was fraud. So people feeling like a fraud, whether it's something whether it's their 10th book they're writing, whether it's owning a business and not feeling like that they are worthy or deserving of being that owner, whether it's being an athlete and having won the race, but thinking, yeah, but you only won that time because the other person fell over, or you got lucky and you had the wind behind you. All of these reasons that people come up with. If somebody right now is listening to this and go, yeah, do you know what? That's me. I feel a fraud in an area of my life. How do they know?
There are tests that you can do. So I've got a quiz, imposter syndrome quiz, and it asks you 20 questions based on what you feel and think about your success, what kind of thoughts, typical thoughts come up for you, how you behave, things like if you procrastinate, you compare yourself, if you're a perfectionist, if you over prepare, if you just push through, there's a whole bunch of coping behaviors that are folded into this. So part 1, take the test.
Okay. And just for the purpose of the conversation, what are some of those things that people would be experiencing? So they can take the test as a really practical thing, but what would they, if people are listening to this right now, they're driving along, they can't just go and take the test straight away. What are some symptoms, if you like, that they would be experiencing?
Sure. Well, there are three types of symptoms. There's imposter syndrome thinking, there's the physiological response, and then there's the coping behaviors that I just mentioned a few. So that the imposter syndrome thinking is that feeling that you're not quite good enough, people are going to find you out, that you're doubting yourself, and that, like you say, you just got lucky, right? Despite all the evidence. So what this kind of thinking does, it's very distracting. It's like there's a second track playing in your head saying this over and over. You walk into a meeting and it's going, oh, they're going to find you out, they're going to chuck you out, they're going to fire you, it's going to be humiliating. All of that creates internally in the body stress, right? It triggers your nervous system. It triggers it into fight, flight, and freeze. And when that happens, then that triggers all sorts of other physiological changes in your heart rate, your blood pressure, changes your ability even to think clearly. And it causes sleeplessness and tension. So that's a very uncomfortable place to be. So in order to try and cope with that, you kind of automatically do these coping behaviors. And they're hiding behaviors to keep you out of the spotlight, like not speaking up enough, like deflecting praise. Oh no, I've just got lucky, those kind of things. And the procrastination is part of that. And then there is striving behaviors, like I'm not feeling good enough, solution must be to be good enough. And then you get the pushing through, the over preparing, the comparing, the perfectionism, right? So you do these coping behaviors and they've got this kind of compulsive feel, and we talk about them in terms of bad habits. And, we try and get rid of them as bad habits, but they're driven by something else. And so we do those and we see that they're not allowing us to perform at our best. And then we judge ourselves, right? We beat ourselves up. Oh, there I went again. I was procrastinating again. And that feeds into the imposter syndrome thinking that I'm not good enough. So you see, you've got this wheel going round and round of those three major kind of symptoms. So those are ones that people will see, but what they won't see is the root cause of it, because that's unconscious.
I'm a big believer, if you treat the cause, the symptoms go. And in the Western world, we've become so conditioned to treating symptoms, everything from medicine and whatever. So what is the root cause?
The root cause is a belief, but there are different kinds of beliefs, right? There are beliefs like what's going to be a good stock to invest in, right? And your mind can change, from depending on evidence. Then there are beliefs of more things that we think are more true, like your political views, your religious views, spiritual views, things like that. And then right at the bottom of the depth of the unconscious, if you like, there's beliefs about our identity, what it means to be who we are, what shapes us. And the belief that drives imposter syndrome is one of those. It's an identity level belief. And it's the belief that your worth and your actions are tied together, that your worth depends on what you do. So if you do something well, you feel on top of the world. If you do something and make a mistake, you feel like you're standing in a pit, right? And that roller coaster of emotions is depending on the environment around you and your actions. So it's really, this is the suffering that we're talking about, right? It makes you vulnerable to external situations. You change that belief, you separate out your worth from your actions, and then your worth is always there. It's a constant in your life, and that leaves you free to go out and explore, right? And you're free to go out and try things without fear of failure making you bad. And so this is why getting rid of imposter syndrome is so, rather the belief is so important. And as you say, when you change that belief to unconditional worth, all of the symptoms of imposter syndrome fall away. It's like a little minor miracle every time with every client. It's such a joy to witness, because it's a complete unburdening, complete relief. They have energy back, their relationships improve, they're even better in their career, and they were already good. Yeah,
it's a complete paradigm shift, isn't it, for most people? I'll often say that the two most powerful words in the English language are I am, because anything you say I am, you are. It's your identity. And the sort of the people that struggle with change the most, in my experience, are people that try and make change at behavioral level. You take neurological levels of change, the Robert Dilts model, the lowest level of behavior. Whereas if you really want to create shift by going straight to identity, which is what you've spoken about, then everything else has to change. If you change your identity, your values and beliefs change, you're obviously going to have your values change, your beliefs change, your behaviors change, your actions change, the whole thing, then your environment changes, all because of that one shift. And it's super powerful.
It really is. And this is then sometimes where people have a bit of resistance, because there's what's familiar, right? And the brain, when we look at just the neurological level, the brain likes to keep you safe in the comfort zone. People talk about in the box of your identity. So some people with just the thought of changing my identity, oh my gosh, that what would I be? Maybe it would be worse. Maybe this belief is true, and I'll find out that I'll have proof that I'm not really good enough. What I find with imposter syndrome, that belief in conditional worth is not who you are. It's an overlay on top of who you really are. You take it away, and then your natural, authentic self just bubbles up. And so, you know, there's a lot of leadership advice to be more authentic, right? And I don't know how people can just be. Yeah, again, it's the I am thing. When you take away that belief of conditional worth, then your values, who you really are, bubbles up. So people feel better about themselves. They feel more aligned with their own values. They feel like they're making decisions based on something that resonates deeply with them. So people become more and more satisfied with their lives because they're living authentically, because it's not on this roller coaster of suffering.
Absolutely. And kind of my view on that is it's about being congruent. You know, are you truly congruent with what you think and what you believe? And to sort of touch on this concept of the unconditional, sort of being unconditional in terms of where you're thinking, is that for anybody that's listening to this that have got children, you know, or even people that haven't got children, you're saying to them, well, what does your child need to do to get love from you? The answer is nothing.
Yes.
They don't need to win the award or be good or whatever. What they need, they've got that love regardless.
Yes.
They've got that love regardless. Yet we think ourselves a lot of the time, right, we need to do or have something in order to get that love for ourselves.
Yeah.
And like you say, when you take all of that away and you have, I mean, one of my daily affirmations is I deserve everything I want now. That doesn't mean I get everything, but it's being deserving. And also another one is I'm worthy and deserving of love, money, and success. It's about having that deserve level no matter what.
Yeah.
And I've found those two affirmations sort of super powerful, because there's no conditional element to it. It's just I am. You know, it's extremely powerful. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but probably one of my top 10 all-time books is Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And it goes really into the identity piece. I just think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yes, I think you tapped on it very precisely with talking about children, and that I am a good, how to be a good boy. You see, that's a label of identity, and we apply it to the actions. Now, there's going to be a lot of parents out there going, oh my gosh, I'm screwed up my kids. It's like, no, this belief in conditional worth, it underlies all of society all around the globe. It's like 99.99% of it. It's the classic, we're a fish swimming in water. You know, how when we're walking along, unless there's a wind, how often do we think about the air around us, the air pressure around us, right? We just don't. And so it's really, really hard to see that this belief, and that's why it's an unconscious belief. And that's why people just see the symptoms and then they focus on that, because they don't see the root cause. And the brain is very simple, right? You hit your toe and your brain will look at what hit your toe, right? It looks for, narrows in for where the pain came from, so we can change it.
And from a practical point of view, so if somebody's listening to this right now and they're going, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I definitely see that I can do that. And I find that my conditional worth is because of X, Y, Z that I haven't done yet. That's impacting me. What do they, aside from sort of acknowledging it, which I suppose is part one, what can they then do that starts to undo that belief? Because a lot of times in life, it's not necessarily about what we learn. It's quite a lot of the times about what we unlearn and we stop doing.
Yes. The original belief came from the point where we're between 18 months and 3 years old. And we were learning at that point our identity. We were learning that we were separate from other people, separate from other objects. And that's the point in which, in an ideal world, we would have separated our worth from our actions. So just to be clear that it's not due to any childhood trauma, poor parenting, or anything like that. It's a separation that didn't happen. The good news is we can do that later. So where you would start with awareness, as you say, and then dialing down the stress. You know, one of those symptoms is a physiological stress. So that's the lowest hanging fruit. Do whatever you can to bring yourself back from fight, flight, and freeze state into a calmer state. That will dial all of this down. Now, sometimes there's nothing you can do. You're in a high pressure environment, it's pressure cooker, and you have what you've got. And then the next step will be to actually change the belief. And there is a very systematic process to changing this particular identity level belief. And the reason for that is the belief is stored in a particular part of the brain called the amygdala. Right, and the amygdala in the brain, there's two parts of it, stores combination of emotion and memory, and it does this automatically. And so the belief that your actions and your worth are combined has been built up over the years by more and more evidence, right? Something happens and we feel bad and the brain goes, okay, that's true, right? So it's very hard to just unlock. You can't address it with things like mindset because it's such a deep level belief. So if you stand in the mirror and you say, I am enough, and your brain's saying, oh no, you're not, and I've got all this evidence behind it, right? It won't happen. It might dial down the stress a little bit, right? But it's not going to change that belief. So to change that belief, we have to use a particular process that unlocks those layers, that discharges the emotional charge that's related to certain points of evidence. So it's a gradual process. You go step by step through it. And the first part of it is learning about other people's unconditional worth. So first you start to build evidence of other people's unconditional worth by taking away the judgment of them. When you've got practice in that, then you can turn that lens on yourself, and then you start to let go of your judgment of all the things that you've done in the past that you deem as failures and therefore made you bad. You unwind those, you let go of those, and this sense of deep self-acceptance comes up, which is how people experience unconditional worth.
On the part that you just said about seeing it in others, so some people listen to this podcast will be familiar with the law of reflection and transparency. So they're essentially what we see in others, we see in ourselves. So is that the purpose of that? Is by us being able to acknowledge that we can see other people that have unconditional self-worth, enables us to be able to see, well, if we can see it in them, we can see it in ourselves, to give us that basis of evidence, that essentially the new evidence, the new belief references, whatever you want to call it, that, well, if they can do it, then we can do it, type thing.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's the easiest route through, right? Because people, particularly when you're a high achiever with imposter syndrome, people are often hardest on themselves, and it's really hard to. So there are people, a lot of people in the very, very deeply spiritual people, and they'll say, just love yourself. And the most common response I've heard from that is, love myself, I don't even like myself. We're hardest on ourselves. So yeah, this is the easiest way through. This is why it's a progression.
And how quickly is that progression? So somebody right now is listening to this and going, all right, that's fine, Dr. Halliday, but I want it, and I'm fed up, and I'm in pain, and I'm suffering. How quickly can I get through from not liking myself or constantly beating myself up about that you're a fraud for this or a fraud for that, to then being able to be free of that and have that unconditional thought process?
Faster than you might think. At 8 to 12 weeks. So this is the program that I do one-to-one with people. It's highly personal, and the reason for that is that, because you think, I've got to let go of a lifetime of evidence that this belief is true. Actually, the way the brain works is by associations. The way we remember things, we think of an apple, then we think of an apple pie, and then we think of our grandmother's apple pie, and we move by association. So when we're updating these old beliefs and we're saying, actually, no, that wasn't a threat. No, that wasn't a threat, and the brain will change. And so it only takes 15 to 20 of those little steps to to permanently change it. It's very exciting, and it's based on the process uses changing the neurochemicals in the brain and how they influence the memories that are stored there. And it's very exciting. I could completely geek out on this. I'll rein it back in. But that's what I explain in my new book. So I've just published a new book, Outsmart Imposter Syndrome, and I go into all the details there, so I don't have to go too heavy right now.
Yeah. No, it's great. I think it's fascinating. When I first heard about the concept of understanding episodic memory and understanding that the memory is linked to an emotion, and that's what we remember, right? Is the stuff that we remember is the things that we have the strongest emotion linked to them. You know, if you were to ask most people, where were you on September the 11th, 2001, pretty much everyone on the planet can tell you where they were.
Yeah.
You ask everybody, where were you on September the 10th, 2001? No one can remember. So it's understanding that. And it's like you say, when you, I would call it dissolve, people use different terminology. When you dissolve that emotional charge that's linked to that memory, through whatever the process is, you know, I tend to go for the jugular and sort of see it a bit like a gestalt. You know, let's go for the biggest thing, and then kind of the rest of the memories all dissolve. It's amazing what can happen when you bring people back to that equilibrium, because then it's just gone. It no longer has that hold over people.
Exactly. And I think that's really important, because again, people worry, won't I just forget things? Won't I stop learning? You know, won't I just be happy being mediocre if pain isn't driving me? But what happens is that you can still remember the facts of the situation, but thinking back to them, they don't make you cringe, they don't make you angry, you know, you don't have that emotional response that kind of wells up from it, and that helps really stabilize your day-to-day emotion. Because you know, when you get triggered into fight, flight, and freeze, the nervous system, it changes the blood flow to your muscles so that you can fight or flight or run away, right? Absolutely. But one of the places it takes the blood flow away from, because it's got to come from somewhere, is the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, which is your logical, strategic thinking and planning part of the brain, which means you literally don't have the resources, the nutrients and oxygen to think so well. So your thinking goes foggy, your mind goes blank, you don't make such good decisions, you're more emotionally reactive. And Princeton University did a study, and they found that your IQ actually drops by 13 points when you're in that stressed state. So the more that you can keep yourself calm, equanimity is a great word, yeah? And so the more you can keep yourself calm, the more access you have to your highest potential. And I know that high achievers is really important for them. So start with calm, but when we get rid of what's driving the suffering, the stress, then it really becomes effortless confidence, natural resilience, and yeah, the possibilities then become limitless. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it really is, and that, like you say, it's almost alchemy, isn't it? You know, you're turning coal into gold. You're getting people to see things. You're dissolving that emotional charge. You're getting back to balance and being able to operate from there. Out of interest, have you ever experienced people having? Because I've never thought about it in this context until we were just speaking. Is that I suppose the opposite of, so still being imposter syndrome, but kind of at the other end of the spectrum. So I suppose what I'm thinking with this is, I'll often say to people to write what I call a boast list. So the etymology, the root origin of the word boast means to inflate. And if you take a typical car tire, if a car tire is underinflated, it's no good. If it's inflated perfectly, it runs. But the opposite is to overinflate it. So it goes from kind of you imagine the swing of the pendulum from one side to the other, where people they don't have the imposter syndrome. They think they're a fraud because they can do it, but they can't. But it's when they can't do it, but they think they can. Does that class as imposter syndrome as well, or does that come under something else? I've just, as we're speaking.
That's a really good point. So there is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect that you might have heard of, and that's where people, when they're learning something, this is in every area, when they're learning something new, they usually have the attitude of, oh, I can do that. How hard could it be? Because they don't understand how much there is to learn and how poor their skills are. So that's when people can have that overinflation. So if you look at the learning progression, this is the unconscious incompetence. And then as you learn, you become conscious incompetence. You realize that you have got a lot more to learn, and then it goes to further to conscious competence. So you've developed the skills and you know it, right? So that's kind of the learning cycle. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is unconscious incompetence. Now, there is another thing which some people with imposter syndrome do, which is to try and inflate, right? If I just tell everyone that I'm good enough, then that's going to, maybe they'll believe it and they won't think I'm a fraud. So it's another kind of defensive thing. And people worry, I think, that if I get rid of imposter syndrome, I'm going to be that guy, right? I'm going to be arrogant. I'm going to be boastful. I'm going to lose my ability to rationally assess something. And I think that comes down to the word self-doubt. Again, it's one of these imprecise things in our language. When you're doubting yourself, are you doubting what you've done or who you are, right? And so self-doubt means both. When we get rid of imposter syndrome, get rid of the belief that's driving it, separate those two, then you lose that doubting yourself, right? Because now your worth is unconditional, but you keep your ability to reflect on things, to change your mind. And now even you do it better because you're less driven by this emotional internal reaction that makes you, respond in more reactive ways.
I love that question that you just said. Are you doubting yourself or are you doubting what you've done? Because most people, if you ask them if they, I'm just playing it out in my head, but I imagine that if you ask most people, I'm doubting myself, and then you ask them why, it will be based on what they've done anyway. So really, it's they're doubting what they've done. Yeah, really
and that's the whole expression of conditional worth right there. I've done something good, I am good. I've done something bad, I am bad.
Really interesting. Really interesting. And I'm just curious because you mentioned a book. So there's actually two books, right? Because you've got a book that's been an Amazon #1 bestseller, Unmasking the Coach's Guide to Imposter Syndrome. And then we've got a new book, Outsmarting Imposter Syndrome, that's actually due out very soon. Well, I'm just thinking as we're recording this, it may have actually just come out. So it would have just come out. It comes out in September 2023. And breaking this down, would you say you've taken kind of an engineer's approach to almost reverse engineering how people get out of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I have actually. So the coach's guide is for coaches, and that's really all about calming down the symptoms that we've discussed. What I talk about in Outsmart Imposter Syndrome is how we change that belief. Now, the way that I developed the program, because this is from my Inner Success program, the way I developed that program was first, I was working as a coach, helping people with unconditional worth, but I didn't have, the tools were a little outdated. They were 1990s style. They still were effective, but they weren't very precise. And then I did some training in neurofeedback. So I trained as a neurofeedback trainer. This is where you put electrodes on someone's head, put them in a dark chamber, play their brain waves back to them as feedback, and track their brain's response as they're going through a set of exercises. And one of the exercises in that whole program was a belief change exercise. And I saw that and I thought, that's it right there. This is where we're changing that belief in conditional worth. And the results from the overall neurofeedback were fantastic, really, really good. And then when I trained as a trainer in this, I thought, okay, and here's the engineering researcher in me, I want to be able to explain this. Where's the research? Where's the proof? So I went through just this belief change process. Okay, here's the proof from the neuroscience research. Here's the proof from the psychological inquiries. But that thing there has no basis anywhere in anything. So I threw that out and I distilled the process down to just the things that were very scientific and repeatable. And the joy in doing that is when I put it together as a program specifically for imposter syndrome, it was phenomenally successful, right? It's like every person who did the work, got the results, right? If someone dropped out, I can't help. If they wouldn't do the work, I can't help, right? They do the work, they get results. Now, those kind of statistics are unheard of in engineering and science, and particularly psychology, because there's a lot of dependence there. But the reason is because we're changing the brain, we're changing the way that the amygdala responds to a perceived threat in the same way, using the same mechanism that the brain formed that belief in the first place, which is changing the neurochemicals in a very particular way. So it got really hard down into the science, and the result is, amazing.
That's the beauty of having it as such a scientific replicable process, is that you do these steps, you end up with this outcome. And that's kind of what
it's predictable, right? Because of course this is the way the brain works, and it's not like it doesn't depend on anything other than people have. Well, one of the things it depends on is people having the motivation to do it. And I think you might find this really interesting, Will. When somebody is motivated to make a change, it actually stimulates the neurochemical acetylcholine in the amygdala that allows the brain to change. So if you don't have motivation, right, then the neurochemical doesn't get released, and so you can't change. Everything that we've said about, you've got to have a reason why, you've got to be motivated to change, that's got this really strong neuroscientific basis to it. So I this is what I geek out on. I think that's very fun.
Yeah, and I'm with you for sort of geeking out on these things and drilling into it and finding out the science. So well, first of all, Dr. Halliday, thank you so much for coming and joining me on the episode. We could talk for hours on this topic. As we mentioned, there's a couple of books, the Unmasking the Coach's Guide to Imposter Syndrome, and obviously the new book, Outsmarting Imposter Syndrome. So people can go and grab that, get that, and learn all about that. If people are thinking, wow, this is really fascinating, they want to find out more about you, they want to connect with you, where can they find out more?
Okay, so my website is outsmartimpostersyndrome.com. So that's very straightforward. I'm mostly on LinkedIn. So that's Tara-Halliday-PhD. And I'm just starting to record a whole bunch of videos on YouTube. And that channel is called Outsmart Imposter Syndrome. So pretty easy to find.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for, like I said, being a guest. For those of you who've been listening to this, if you found this insightful, absolutely, please let us know. We'd love to know. So if you're not already in it, join the Make It Happen community on Facebook. Come and share what you learned about the podcast, what you really liked, and come and let us know. So we'd love to hear from you. Tara, again, thank you so much for being a guest. Really enjoyed our conversation.
My pleasure, Will. Me too.
And for everybody else that's been listening, until next time, make it happen. Thank you for listening to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with anybody that you think could benefit from it, and also make sure that you hit subscribe so that you get the new episodes as soon as they're released.